Okay. And oops. So hopefully I am sharing my slides. Kristen, can you confirm that my slide is sharing, please?
I don't see it.
You don't see it. Okay, let's go back. This is the fun part. Okay, screen share. There. Okay, I did it wrong. I'm learning. Okay, so we're going to share that, and we're going to go from the beginning of this slide. Okay. Just a tiny bit about me. My name is Charity Rouse. I'm the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And this is a presentation I've been doing off and on for the last number of months, actually, because 2020 is an exciting year for things other than the quarantine. It is an exciting year for the census. The census is taken every 10 years, and it's important. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important and see a little bit of historically what the census pages have looked like. I've been at Spartanburg County Public Library since June of 2014, so almost 6 years now. Before that, I lived in Kansas for a number of years, North Carolina for a number of years, and I am originally from Virginia. So most of the census examples you'll see are from my family, and they are from South Carolina, but these are representative of what the census is going to look like no matter where you are. So the US Federal Census, it was first taken in 1790, and it is authorized by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States. If everybody can make sure you're muted, that would be great. On my side, it looks like everybody is muted, but I'm getting some feedback. Okay, cool, thank you. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution basically says, in order to be a democratic republic, we have to be able to count how many people live where in order to have the appropriate number of people in our House of Representatives. Our House of Representatives originally just started fairly small, and then as the country grew, it grew. We have capped it at 435 because that's how much space there is in the US Capitol building for the House of Representatives. And for a couple of years, it was 437, and that was circa 1950, a little bit before to about 52, when Alaska and Hawaii were coming in to the United States, and they got to, until the 1950 census, had representatives for everybody. So the purpose is to apportion seats in the House of Representatives, and for the purpose of taxation, although other than a very unpopular tax in 1797 to help pay for the Revolutionary War, the taxation piece didn't happen until, I believe, 1913. It was the 19 teens. And it does include the whole number of free persons, excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons, read enslaved population, prior to emancipation in 1865, in which case it was whole number of all free persons, excluding Indians not taxed. That continued for a while. Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to make sure everybody is muted so that we don't have background noise. Cool. So the federal population census, which is the census that we're taking as of April 1st of 2020, is released 72 years after it's taken. So 1940 was released on April 1st, 2012, 1950 will be released in April 2022. Originally, it was not intended to be released for genealogical or other purposes. And so this was a negotiation that happened. There's an entire book about all of this stuff that if you are really interested in, get with me afterwards and I can get you connected with that book. It's fascinating reading if you're really interested in this kind of thing. So 72 years, and I was working in genealogy in 2012, and it took minutes when they released the 1940 census. It took about 3 or 4 minutes for genealogists to crash the National Archives website when they released it. So hopefully in 2022 they'll have better resources and better scalability for all of the genealogists who are interested in having all of this information on the 1950 censuses. Not every census will ask the same questions. We'll go over some of the questions, but we're not doing in depth of all of the censuses because there are quite a few between 1790 and today. Why didn't it start before 1790? Well, we hadn't had the revolution and we were still colonies prior to 1790. 1776, we declared our independence, but we didn't win the war until mid 1780s. And then it took us a couple of years to figure out how to govern ourselves. So 1790 was the first time to take an official population count. An Indian census was taken for those who were on reservations, and it was supposed to have been taken yearly from the 1880s to the 1930s or so, are the bulk of what I have seen. It is available for some, it is not available for all. Those Indians on the reservations are part of the Indians not taxed that are not counted on the main population schedule. So if you've got questions about that, ask me separately, email me, and we'll work on that and talk through that, as it's a slightly different set of resources. Where can you find these censuses? You can find them on Ancestry Library Edition, which for many libraries, including Spartanburg right now, is available with your library card from home. Just go to the library's website and follow the link to online resources during the quarantine, and that'll get you to it, or go to the Kennedy Room page and that link will get you to it. FamilySearch.org is always free, and then FindMyPast.com also has the US Federal Censuses for free. No matter what, those items are free. Ancestry.com does not have all of the federal censuses for free, just Ancestry Library Edition. And again, they usually limit Ancestry Library Edition to the libraries, but for the moment, at least through the end of April and possibly longer, Ancestry Library Edition is available from home with your library card. And I know other libraries have that as well. An additional place to find a bunch of census resources is stevemorse.org. Please note that is .org. .com will get you to Steve Morse, the guitar player for Deep Purple and other heavy metal bands, rock bands. Also a really good website to spend some time on, but a very different website than stevemorse.org, which has a lot of census and immigration records and resources. So, okay, now we're going to get to, hopefully, looking at there. What do the censuses actually look like? Well, in 1790, they didn't ask many questions. Their purpose was they wanted to get a head count of how many people were in each district so that they could get the right number of representatives into Congress and let people elect the right number of people for that area. So what happened was, at that time, the federal marshals were involved in doing the census, and they went household by household And what you see here is household, head of household, and the number of men over, I think it's 16, males over 16, males under 16, number of women, and then number of freed people and number of slaves, and then totals. So it was not a whole lot of information. You got just the head of household. There was no real privacy issue on this because it's just numbers. And so what happened was for 1790 up through 1840, they would post the census. They would write out an alphabetized list, which this is an example of, and they would post it in a public place, usually the post office or someplace like that in the community. And it was the head of household's responsibility to check and see that the information was correct. And so this happened for a number of years, again, as I said, until 1840. And then sometimes when you're looking, you will find a typed version of this. All three of these examples for 1790 are the exact same information, just different ways of that it's been copied and distributed. So if you're not finding somebody you're looking for, you're going to want to look for transcription errors, spelling errors. 20th century is when spelling really came into a standardized form. So prior to the 20th century, check different spellings. It was all handwritten, copy errors happened, that kind of thing. Arguably the 21st century, we're going back to the wild world of non-standard spelling. So, feel free to search around a little bit when you're looking. So that's what the 1790 census looked like. This one is 1840. And this is one that I wanted to show. Again, it's tick marks, and 1790 all the way up through 1840, it's tick marks. It's just name of head of household, head of family, and then tick marks in different age categories and person type categories. So on this, one of the reasons I chose 1840 was to show you've got categories for free white persons, male, female, free colored persons, male, female. On this page, you've got to turn to the back of the page. Oops, sorry. And this is my family, the Thompson Allen down here. There is a free male of color in the household, and I'm going to have to check on that because that's an interesting thing. You have to turn to the back to get the number of enslaved and the numbers of some demographics that they asked. So there are 4 people in the household out of 15 that are involved in agriculture, and there is 1 person in a learned trade or profession. I would presume that is Thompson Allen, but I do not know at this point. I've got to do some more research into that particular part of the family. Oops. And there's the number 1 male, 3 females who are enslaved. So I'm not sure what their roles in the household were because 2 of the female enslaved were under 10, so they were children. So it's just, it can help you get some information about your ancestors and what their family life might have been like. In 1850, they went to 1850 and 1860 went to 2 separate schedules. So schedules meaning forms of the census. 1 for free people and 1 for enslaved population. And they started asking more questions, and this is the first year they didn't just write it out and stick it up on the door of a community building for people to check. So you had to trust that the census taker got it right at this point. But you can see along the left-hand side, it's saying what households and what number of household these people are in the visiting of the census taker. If you were in a large city, such as Chicago or New York, as opposed to rural agricultural South Carolina, as this is, then you might have lots of households, numbers of family in that column too at one address, because an apartment building could hold many, many families. So my Thompson Allen and his wife Rhoda are down here at the bottom. It asks age, gender, and then color. Everybody on this page is white. No free person of color in his household at this point. So I don't know what happened to that person. He was a farmer and he had $1,200 of real estate owned, and everyone was born in South Carolina. And it must be the school question. You could that the kids were all going to school, other than the 3-year-old and 5-year-old. So I said there was a second schedule. So Schedule 2 in 1850 and 1860 were the slave inhabitants. And again, this is Marlborough County. You can see on the top of the census, it gives you a lot of information about where it is the census is taken, and who is writing it. Again, the marshals, US Federal Marshals, were the ones who did the census for many years. And you see what day of the year they took it. So this doesn't tell you the name of the slave. It tells you the name of the slave owner and occasionally the slave, the overseer or manager of the property. Sometimes an executor of an estate if things are in flux. And you'll see here Thompson Allen, Joel Allen is his brother. Joel was a minister, so many people owned slaves in South Carolina in the 1800s. One of the things I do want to draw your attention to is on the right-hand column, hopefully my cursor will show up, under James Cox, we have a 60-year-old male, black, who is blind. It was in this 1850 and coming forward that they started asking questions of both the white free population, the free color population, and the enslaved population as to whether people were deaf and dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. Those are the words on the form, using the words as they were used in that time frame. But if someone is researching their family and they're African American and they're looking at a surname Cox, and they know from 10 years later, or 20 years later at this, which gets this person to a venerable age, but if they're blind and they manage to make it to 60, they're doing really well in the mid-1800s. Then you might have a clue that this might be your person that you're looking for. So look for not just the right age and the right gender, but take a look at all of the clues on the various census pages. Check out everything that is not indexed. On Ancestry and Family Search, they index the main columns, but they don't always index all of the far right-hand columns on the big forms, and sometimes those can be just as helpful. So we're going to skip up to 1920. I do want to say one thing about the 1890 census. The 1890 census was done in a slightly different format. It was done on a family sheet that each family got their own piece of paper rather than these large sheets. But unfortunately, in the 1920s, there was a fire at the US Commerce Department, and all but about 6,400 census records were destroyed in that fire, and the water damage and etc. surrounding that fire. So if you have an 1890 census record for someone in your family, you have hit the genealogy lottery, and I would love for you to share that with me and I will do the happy dance with you on that, because I have no one in my family for whom the record survives. So 1920, why did I pick this particular census? Well, there are a couple of things that are really interesting about this census. 1920, they're asking things like nativity and mother tongue of the person and their father and their mother. This is a very boring page because pretty much everybody on this page is born in South Carolina, and their parents were too. A few North Carolinas thrown in there. This is my great-grandmother and her family in Bethea Township, in actually Latta town. And the census was enumerated on January 7th, 1920. And I had trouble finding this because my great-grandmother right here, Carrie Rouse, that was transcribed as Cassie Rover by the people who transcribed things. I finally found it because I'm like, well, let's search for her mom, Marion Allen, because I had forgotten that after Carrie was widowed in 1915, she had moved back in with her mother and a sister who had always lived at home and never married. Cassie Rover, I'm like, this is bad handwriting. Who wrote this? You know, she was widowed, she was 39, etc. So in the top right-hand corner, you see the who is doing this. They have changed from the marshals to paid enumerators like we use today. It's her bad handwriting. That is my great-grandmother who enumerated that census page. That tells me a number of things. She has taken this job. She is literate, which I knew. And she was able to earn some money to help support the household with her widowed mother, her single sister, and her. They ran a boarding house in Latta. So it's kind of interesting to be able to tell. Make sure you look up and down the page and see if neighbors are there. You will find married women, like sisters, sometimes on that same page. They just live down the street or next door. So it can be helpful to look a little bit before and a little bit after as you're doing the genealogy research. And then we're going to skip 20 years and go to 1940. In 1940, there was upheaval in the 1930s. We had the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. So in 1940, they started asking questions about where people were residing on April 1st, 1935, to try to get a little bit of information about how people moved around during that time of turmoil and transition. Also, my family in this one almost got missed by the census. They are at the very bottom of the page here, and the census taker had gone and canvassed their street, written everybody down. They weren't home, didn't answer the door, whatever. So they got missed in the first round. So the census taker went back as per the instructions, and they're the very last people to be recorded on their street for the 1940 census. You get the name of the street. They're living in Norfolk, Virginia at this point. You get the location, so 23 A-View Street. You get the number of household in order. To find their neighbors, you're going to have to go back and find other addresses similar to 23 A-View Street earlier in that enumeration district that they assigned the census taker. They're renting, and I think that's $17.50 a month. It may be $17.50 a year. I'm not sure how much rent, what the frequency of that amount was. They do not own it. And Carrie, my great-grandmother, is living with her son Jasper and my grandfather John. And if you were lucky, on this page nobody got those lines. They were being used for administrative divisions. You got supplementary questions. So in many years, the census asked basically a short form and a long form. And what we're doing now, what the 2020 census is, I've seen a lot of genealogists just mad about this, has been a short form situation, because in 2000 they chose to discontinue having two forms and go to just one shorter form, more closely related to the original purpose of the census. And we'll talk a little bit more about what has replaced that in a little bit. One of the big topics this past fall was citizenship questions, and people were all up in arms. And so I got curious and wanted to find out when there were citizenship questions and what they were. I'm going to highlight a few of these. This is from National Public Radio, npr.org. And you should be able to just Google npr.org census citizenship questions and get to this infographic. In 1820, that was the first time there were citizenship questions. So heads of household were asked how many foreign-born people not naturalized were in their homes. This is one of the time periods. 1820 is a watershed in naturalization and immigration. It's when there was actually a law that was passed that passenger lists needed to be saved. And so prior to 1820, sometimes we have passenger lists for ships and sometimes we don't. And so they were starting to try to get a handle on this growing population and who was moving here, where they were from, were they acclimating and coming into the melting pot of the US, or were they staying, kind of set aside in their little language and ethnic and religious communities. By 1870, the question was if the person was a male citizen of the US, 21 years or upwards. 1870 is the first census after the Civil War. And so the hidden part of that is, have those who were in the Confederacy signed their allegiance back to the United States. And all males at that point could vote, not just white male landowners. So in 1900, they were still asking about the naturalization of foreign-born men, 21 and older. 21 was the voting age at the time. And then in 1920, it starts asking about all foreign-born people. In the early 1920s, the Cable Act was passed and women's citizenship became independent of their spouses for the most part. That's a whole nother program. And so there, and also in 1920, just lost what amendment it is. Anyway, women's right to vote was passed, and we're celebrating 100 years of women in this country being able to vote. So kind of interesting how the census does reflect some of the questions of the day. One of the cool questions on the 1930 census was whether the house owned a radio set. That was kind of the big screen TV of the day. And of course, those questions were written before November of 1929 when everything crashed. So a lot of people still had their radio sets. Whether they kept them through the Depression or not is a whole nother issue. So privacy issues are another big thing on as a topic with the census. And this is a little more thorny than the naturalization question. But as I said before, 1790 to 1840, they had no privacy guarantee on those censuses. 1850, they didn't post the response publicly because it did list out every member of the household and their age, so it was more personally identifiable information. 1880, there were additional privacies guaranteed. And then 1952 is when that official 72-year rule was put in place on the release of the census. In the 1930s and 40s, there was some use of the census information for Social Security enrollment, among other things. In 1954, Title 13 of the US Code was actually, officially put together as this is where the census law lives. And if you're interested in reading that, you can go to, I think it's congress.gov, and you can pull up a PDF of Title 13 of the US Code and read it to your heart's content. For many years, the director of the Census Bureau could disclose information to other governmental departments, and that went on until 1976. 1976 is when a lot of the loopholes were absolutely closed. Some uses of the census information that were between governmental agencies. World War I draft information was gathered from the 1910 census. World War I draft was the first draft we had ever done in our country. And they kind of wanted to know, hey, have we caught everybody? Have we sent cards to all of the right people for the draft? Okay, I can get that. Okay. World War II, this one's one of the really thorny ones. Under the War Powers Act, there was information shared about specific Japanese residents in specific enumeration districts, both in Washington, D.C. area and along the West Coast. And that led to those residents being put in internment camps during World War II. I personally think this was a misuse of the powers of the government, but that's my personal. And you can read a lot more about this. The privacy protections have been significantly strengthened. This type of release cannot happen. So please, if you have not already filled in your census online, by phone, by mail, please fill it in. I can show you an infographic from census.gov that is where I got a lot of the privacy information. Why the census is so important today? It is the apportionment of congressional representatives. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have 435 congressional seats in the House of Representatives on the federal level. And the census is how we determine who gains and who loses population and thus representation. So there are places in the US, such as the upstate of South Carolina, that may very well get representatives, and places like Western Kansas that may very well lose representatives. So having a correct count is really kind of important. There's also flow-through funding from the federal government. Fiscal year 2016, which is what the stats were when I put this together originally. I think fiscal year 2017 is now available. It's billions of dollars. And there are 55 kind of primary federal spending programs, but there's a lot of other federal spending that comes through. States like South Carolina that do not do a separate state census also use the federal census numbers for state representation and state flow-through funding. So your roads, your schools, your Medicare, your senior services, a lot of those programs get funding on a per capita basis. I mentioned earlier the long form went away 20 years ago, and that was when they started doing what they call the American Community Survey. This is a yearly survey, and I've got the website there for you if you want to learn more about it. And it is an in-depth survey of household income is, and education attainment, and all of that kind of thing. It's a very in-depth survey. If you get it, it is an official government document that a response is mandated by law. Please fill it in and send it in. But that information is going into help with all of this quarterly statistics and things that we get on jobs and GDP and all of that kind of stuff. And this is my reminder to get to those PDFs that I mentioned. So, oh, and of course, I did this wrong, didn't I? Okay, I need to screen. Okay, I just hit the wrong button. Technology, I love technology, I really do. Let me get back. I need to screen share, and I need that one. Okay, I'm learning. So the history of the census privacy protections, this is available from census.gov, and it walks you through the highlights of what the census, come on, I just want you to move up, what the various privacy things and what has changed with the census at different times. And they say disclosure avoidance would be the search topic at census.gov. That might find it faster than the last time I was trying to hunt for it. But that's one thing to know about. And then the other, okay, the other okay. Okay, well, I guess we'll share that one. The other infographic is this counting for dollars, and you can go to that site and this is the Virginia one. I have the South Carolina one where apparently I can't get to it right now, but it tells you what the flow through money is for a particular state through the biggest 55 federal spending programs. So you can get this for each of the states. And more information. And this is through the George Washington University Public Policy Institute or something like that. But you can find the link from census.gov. So, and I think that was all of the, yes. Gee, this takes less time when I'm not handing things around the room for people to see. Usually I do have examples of all of the census's paper ones that people can look at a little bit more closely. Are there questions? Are there things that people want me to talk about? Feel free to type it in the chat box since I still have everybody muted. Or I guess I can unmute people. That's a little scary, but let's see if I can do it. I know I could mute everybody, so okay, I just hit unmute for everybody, but a lot of people had muted themselves. So are there questions? Feel free to chat or other. Kristen is the best. Kristen has been sending out links for everybody as I've been talking about certain things. So I appreciate that. She is from my team, and I had asked for a volunteer to help with that part of it, so I wasn't having to try to do everything. As you can tell, the technology has been enough of a challenge for me. But just a little overview of the federal census during the census thing. Next Monday night, I will be talking about researching the women in your tree. So, and I can get that link out to people. That's scheduled for our regular Pinckney District Chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society session. So, questions, comments, feedback? I'm glad we had, I think it was 18 at our highest. I'm glad we had a bunch of us here. Ooh. Mary Speed, we should be able to send that out on so stevemorse.org is the Steve Morse page. Yeah, Mary Speed, you may just want to copy and link or open the links from the chat and then save them as a bookmark in your browser. Still working out how some of this works. Thank you for helping be guinea pigs for me. Are there others? The people who usually see me in person know I went through this at lightning speed because it was only a 45-minute talk. Usually I'm still going strong for another 15 minutes or so. Not having questions interrupt me, I think, helped keep me on topic. Don't you think, Kobe? Well, thank you so much. And if you don't have other questions, feel free to head on out. But thank you so much for coming. And my email is charityr@infodepot.org, and I just put it in a little chat box. And feel free to email me if you have questions. It will pop up with an out of office thing, but it's an out of office thing that just says I'm monitoring things from home. And so happy to answer questions. If I can't answer it, I'm a librarian. I will do my best to find where you can find the answer. But good to see everybody here. Thanks so much to all my fellow librarian types. Glad to have you here as well as my genealogy folks. So. And now my tea isn't too cold, I don't think. Ooh. So one of our attendees says that his wife actually does have some family on the 1890 census. Woohoo! Yay! So, cool. Thank you all for being here. Well, yeah, they wouldn't be in South Carolina if they had them, so in Alabama. That works. Thank you so much to Kristen for getting all those links and helping monitor things. And now I need to figure out how to